hopefully you can see my screen. And hello world. This is my version of starting with a bad joke. That's a very important part of getting started on something. I'm mostly talking to myself on the screen here, so that's a little bit disorienting for me. So bear with me. If you guys have questions, hopefully we'll be able to get a chance to answer. I do hope you drop questions into the chat for me, because that makes it a lot more fun for this talk. And I will be able to see those comments on the screen here. So hello, today we're actually going to talk about DMing and professional life skills. I am a producer in video games. I'm also a dungeon master. I think I learned a lot of how to be a dungeon master actually from being a producer. So I'm going to talk today about what that means. So that's check. That's the continuation of the bad joke. Let's move forward. So a little bit about me. Hi, yes, thank you for the welcome. I'm Shiaw-Ling. I'm a senior game producer at Wizards of the Coast. You might know them from things like Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering. I started out in video games about 10 years ago. I've been reading D&D books since I was 9. I read the Monstrous Manual for AD&D way back when. Little did I know that I would have a future working in games, and that all of the loot drop tables and configuration charts I knew actually turned out to be really super useful when I started working in software, because a lot of the way we design games is very similar to how you would go through your monster tables, stats, and such in D&D games. I started off working in Facebook games and then mobile games. I bring that up because, like, people think that you have to go a certain way to work in video games, and there's actually a lot of different ways you can get into the business if you're interested. I'm hoping that if you're at this talk here today, it's because you are interested in either DMing or working in games. So hopefully that's useful information. And again, if you have questions, I would love to take them at the end of the session. So I worked in China for a few years, so I also have a little bit of international experience working with video games outside of the US. And while I was in China, I actually ran a gaming convention. It was a tabletop RPG and board game convention. It was a lot of fun and pretty nuts and crazy. Let's see. So like a lot of kids, one of the things about D&D, though, is that I only recently started DMing. I've been working professionally for many years, and I run meetings and I do a lot of collaboration. And I'm going to talk about how those skill sets really apply to being a DM. I've only been DMing for the last few years because for a very, very long time, like a lot of kids, I had all the books, but I didn't have people to play with. So that was a thing. And then just to finish things off, this is Boo Boo. He is my supervisor at home. He makes sure that while we are all working from home, that I keep at the top of my game. He's very important in that sense. Great. So what can you expect out of this talk? Hopefully, we'll be able to wrap up in 30 minutes. I'm going to leave a little bit of time at the end to talk about questions if people have them. I'm going to talk about a little bit about working in games. I'm going to talk a little bit about, let me catch up to my slides here. My thoughts on good communication and how this all relates to running games. Again, I think I learned a lot about running TRPGs, at least, from running meetings, which is why I'm also super passionate about why being a good DM actually teaches a lot of great skills for communication, for people management, and even public speaking, because you are running a table full of people. And sometimes those are people you don't know, and you have to very quickly understand what they need. So be warned also, like, I might tell D&D stories. This is one of those sessions where people start talking, this time in that game. Hopefully to bring it all together for you guys. And definitely if you have questions, I would love to take them. The two main systems I run are D&D and a system called 10 Candles. So there's kind of a little bit of different skill sets used in each. And so this can be a more general talk if folks are interested. But I will be talking a lot about D&D because I also work at Wizards of the Coast. So let's get started. Whoops. I'm going too fast. I'm sorry. Let's talk about planning and preparation. One of the most important things in work life, and if you're working in games, and I think in general, as well as when you're running a D&D game, is to plan and prepare for the game. Everybody, like DM wise, people do it all a little bit differently. I know some DMs who like, I have a concept, it's flushed out in their head, and they just run with it. And I know some producers who work that way too. For me, because this is my talk, I'm going to talk about how planning ahead really helps me a lot. I work a lot with international partners. And so one of the big things when you have international partners is that you have a lot of distance. Sometimes it's a time zone distance. Sometimes it's a lot of physical distance. Sometimes there's cultural and communication differences. And so making sure that people know what's going to happen in advance is super important. I liken this very much to when we have a big important meeting at work with our international partners. It's a lot like doing your session zero. Every time we do a big kickoff, we're like, we really got to get everything nailed down in advance. So when people come together, when we come for the play session, we've got a pretty clear idea of what's going on. And how do you do that? So I think one of the really important things for me is to know your audience. These goofballs are my friends who came out for my birthday party last year when we still could see people face to face. And so I talk about audience because that's one of the things that I think as a DM working with my players and as a producer working in games, again and again, like knowing who I'm talking to, knowing what their goals and objectives are, really helps to run surprisingly good meetings and is also kind of the key ingredient for running a good game. So I've been really, really delighted at how much the two really intersect. So knowing, like, you know, when it's in work, it's knowing what people's stakeholders are. Knowing, you know, kind of like what their goals are, and kind of what the personalities are. For my players, it's knowing like, what do I want to do with their character? In certain types of games, they would just want to level up and be really powerful. Other players just want to express themselves. They don't really care if they're effective. They just want to have a character that's like super goofy or does a certain thing. And so, like, you know, when you're thinking about that, that really shapes how you interact and might create a venture or might, in a meeting context, change the agenda so that people can showcase their best selves. I think of this as like really setting people up for success and making sure that they have what they need out of the game/meeting. So this is getting into like super nerdy territory. But like coordinating players, you know, is just key in the real world. You know, I find that like the work of coordinating for your game, like, you know, who's coming, where are we holding this, are we playing online, what system are we using, making sure that people have all this information in advance, crazy enough, is exactly what I need to do when I have to set a meeting. So like every time you plan a game session, you are really developing real world skills that will help you someday, especially if you want to go into like a production or a role where you're trying to wrangle other people together. I think the other big part of planning and preparation in games is research. I say it, research, research, research. The number of funny stories I think that myself and my DM friends can tell about, like weird facts that you learn when you're researching for a game, like things that you never, ever, ever, ever thought you would need. Suddenly you find yourself on the internet looking at Wikipedia at like 3 a.m. in the morning because you have to prep for a game tomorrow and you forgot some little detail. This is a very common thing. So, you know, here's a fun fact. Hybrids, if you take away nothing else from this talk, hybrids are named based on the sire's name first. What does that mean? That means that if you ever meet a liger, it had a lion daddy and a tiger mom. And if you ever meet a Tiglian, it had a tiger daddy and a lion mom. Why do I know this? It is just a weird fact I learned while I was researching for games because, you know, owlbears show up, although I'm not sure how that one works. So like these are fun facts that you can use in parties. I also just think that the kind of the act of research, the act of learning, the act of always engaging, it's one of the things that I really love about being a DM, and also like works really well because it pushes you to be better, and to keep learning new tools. All right. Another great thing about being a DM is improvisation skills. So in the world of improv, which funny enough, we often bring into like there's a whole series of business improv courses where teach you, instead of going like no or but, they teach you what's called the yes and, which is a really important part of not shooting down ideas and really exploring things. So I call it roll with the punches. What this means is that when you're a DM, you often have to have people, like, you have this great game session, you have these wonderful ideas planned out, and then your players come in and they're like, meh. Either they completely go in a very different direction, they solve the puzzle by doing something completely unexpected and completely steamroll all of your like many hours of planning, or they take it in a direction you completely don't expect. And that's something that like I find in a game setting is so super valuable for life skills, because oftentimes in the real world you're going to encounter situations where you don't really have all the answers, and people are going to throw something at you. They're just going to throw a curveball at you, and you like, it's not necessarily true. Like, they maybe do something that you just don't really know how to adapt to in the moment, unless you have had a lot of practice. You just roll with a bunch. You're like, okay, yes, let's do this. It was not what I expected, but if I'm backing off of that, what can we do? What more can we do? How can we push it? Like a big part of improv is that you don't block and you don't contradict people. Oftentimes, I found that kind of as I've grown as a DM, initially I did often have like, I had this idea and then players do something else, and you're really tempted at first to like be like, no, you can't do that, or like a bear drops on you. I've had DMs who drop bears on you when the party splits, so that's a thing. But like, instead of directly changing that behavior or contradicting it, the yes and can often be more powerful, because it allows you to take the story and develop in a really creative, collaborative space. And I think learning to practice that, everybody of course comes to it differently, but learning and having an environment where you can practice that safely is a great experience. And it's so helpful when you're out in the world and you have to deal with things you don't expect. So that's my little DM advice as well. Games feel terrible when you tell your players that they can't do something or you try to directly contradict them. It is much more fun to lean into it. If your player wants to build, I had an example come up when I was talking with a friend. They wanted to build a character that was half a worm. I'm like, let's go with it. Instead of telling them you can't do it, make the worm. How is this character going to evolve? Are they going to need a cocoon? Like, that can become an entire quest for this character, where suddenly they have to find the right spot to turn into their next evolutionary form, and then they need something to protect them, right? Like, there's so much you can dig into that becomes creative and really becomes collaborative. That's like not something you might have thought of, but maybe better than something you would have just come up with on your own. So, good life skill. Sometimes game products and game design also turns out that way. Not anything I can talk about directly, but there often are moments when you're working where somebody has a creative idea and you have a different one. And instead of going into conflict about it, talking about how you can collaborate with it can actually create even better ideas that nobody thought of on their own. All right. Next up, I'm going to talk about a little bit about big picture thinking. Big picture thinking is really, I think this is sort of a thing that when you move between, which I was a player for many years, and you start moving into being a DM, is something that you start to learn where like my character or the characters I create, like my NPCs, are no longer the center of the story. It's not actually, they are not the most important elements. And this is a really important lesson to learn, both for your work life, like as a game producer, and also as a DM, because you start shifting your thinking to what is really important. What is the goal and the objective of what we're doing here? And in a work life, it's not being tied to your ideas, not like thinking that your way of doing something is the only way. You learn to focus on what is the objective of what I want to do. Instead of here's my character and I want them to succeed, it's here's my story. I want the story to succeed. How do I take away that ego? How do I step away enough from, the characters I've created, even the NPCs? I mean, I'm sure many DMs out there might resonate with this, which is you have these NPCs that you super love, but they're maybe not the most important part to really telling the story or having the players really enjoy the game. And I think at the end of the day, for me as a DM, it's really about, did the players get to be their best selves? Did their characters get to explore who they are? And that's what's important. So the world I'm crafting is really about creating a stable space for them to do it. If we have moments along the way where like characters, NPC characters get to shine or become beloved little recurring characters, that's great. But that should never take away from the big objectives. And in that sense, I think, a lot of times when you're in the workplace, if you're thinking about things as like, I have to get my way, like you're really restricting yourself from being able to look at, what's the objective? What is the goal of what we're trying to do? Is what this little piece I'm focusing on the most important, or is there a lot more? I think the other part of picture thinking that I hope a lot of people resonate with is I often sit in meetings at work and I think about who my party members are, because basically my coworkers, in a lot of sense, this is your adventuring party, right? As a producer, I'm often the tank. I'm in the meeting, like running stuff, drawing aggro and attention, because that's my role, and that enables like my designers or my creatives to be the DPS. They're the ones with the big ideas. They come in and they say amazing things. And when you think about like the interactions you have with other people in your work life or your real life, and you think about your adventuring party, it makes a lot of sense about how you want to balance it, how you want to value everybody's role, and how you want to like buff. Sometimes you're buffing folks, sometimes people are buffing you, and how you collaborate and support each other. And I find that like, when you're in a D&D environment, especially as a player, I love to play different roles. So I play a lot of different. I think that also makes a lot of sense why I'm a producer, is that I will go in and play whatever role is necessary. And that reflects on like, how I play as a player, which is I like doing what the group needs so that we can be successful. And it's just kind of a fun way to practice that. All right, I'm moving on to the next one, which is OMG, you're a DM. And guess what? You're also a public speaker now. A lot of folks I know, especially like I know a lot of my friends are really, really terrified of doing public speaking, because you're getting in front of a bunch of people, and like, believe me, this talking to like a camera and like knowing that there are people out there, but not knowing really who you guys are, there's a little disconnect there, which can be really, really, really scary and anxiety inducing. And DMing, funny enough, is a great way of practicing a lot of skills, because a lot of times the reason you're, like, at least for myself, I'm scared of public speaking is I don't know what I'm going to say, or I don't know if I'm going to adapt well to a circumstance. And like, when you're DMing, you're actually in front of, it's a small audience. Hopefully it's people but you're talking in front of them, you're guiding a story, and you have to be really dynamic. You're trying to listen to them at the same time you're trying to tell them information. At the same time, you're trying to like get them to get to a goal so that everybody can be successful and have a satisfying experience. But then, like, you got your players who want to go off and do other things. So like, you're trying to pull attention while trying to manage. And it's really, really challenging, but it's also a great experience. I often think of it as like, because you're telling a story, because there's so much fun involved in it, and because hopefully most people's first D&D experiences are often with your friends, it's a great way to practice doing that public speaking, being like working on, how you pace yourself, working on how you really want to talk to people, when you are in that kind of environment. I will also say DMing is a really, really great way of learning active listening and discussion moderation, because when you have like 3 players talking at the same time and they all want to get what they want to say out, you have to practice in that saying, like, hey, let's take this first, take that second, and then do this person third. You're making those split-second decisions, and you're getting a lot of practice on how to do it well, right? You're kind of gauging like what's been going on, what does this person have to say? Did this person already talk a lot? Maybe I should switch to somebody else. And those are all great, great skills to have in the workplace, in whatever job you take. So good communication. Lastly, my favorite one, be the leader. So get all your ducks in a row. I really love this picture that I found. Also, all the photos that are used in here are either on Creative Commons or they're from my own phone camera. So if you liked any of them, there's a whole Creative Commons website you can pull like free pictures from, which is super awesome. And also one of the things I learned in all my research is you should be careful where you draw sources from, because you don't want to use things that legally belong to other people. All right. Being a DM is being a leader. I don't know if people understand that when they first get into DMing, because you have to be very dynamic. You're often the person setting expectations. You're the person telling everybody, literally the party, what their goals are at the start of the game. And you're the one helping them to like develop their character's goals as they go on. So there's a lot that you do as a DM. And I think especially like I work with I worked with the Lambert House through one of our groups within Wizards that collaborates with the youth there, and we like run them through games sometimes. And I'm always amazed because they have such amazing youth there who are leaders. You can see it because they run their own games, or they come into a game and they clearly they have this great experience from their role playing of how to work with rules, how to talk to adults, and I think a lot of it comes from like their practice of playing the games with each other. When you do a session 0, like I mentioned before, it is like, you know, when I pre-prep for an international meeting, you're really telling people, hey, where are you coming from? Tell me more about what you want to do. What's your role? What's most important to you to get out of this, right? Recruiting players for a game, that's a lot of times is a lot about leadership skills as well. Like I have a really good pool of people to draw from, but not everybody can always make it. And a lot of that coordination I find is also really, really important to develop. And it actually has real world uses. Like when I have to wrangle people, some people are good on text, some people are better on Discord, some people are best when you email them, and learning all those different things. I think learning how to communicate to a person and what channel they want to communicate to is something that I knew was important as a producer, but is also very important as a DM when I try to get people into a game with me. I also find you're doing a lot of decision making, right? It is one of the opportunities where you get to be a decision maker. You get to call stuff out. You get to say, hey, we're going to be like, especially on a digital environment. Like if I say we're playing on Discord, everybody's getting on the Discord platform. If I say we're on Roll20, everybody's getting on Roll20. You make a lot of decisions. And while like, that may not seem like a big deal. I know that like when I was much younger, like every time I had to learn one of these things, it was a big deal then. I've now learned a lot of these tools, so it's like I can switch between them, but like it was kind of the reason why I learned a lot of tools was because of games. And I find that's really useful now because we often have to swap like between Zoom and Discord. And today it's StreamYard, which I've never used before, but that's fine. It is something I can jump on board on. And then lastly, I think, when you are a DM, you are also in some ways a people manager because you're managing your players. You're helping them to develop their character. You're helping them to figure out what's their character's best life. And ideally, when you're doing it really, really well, you're helping them to make decisions based on information that you provided them in the story. You're not telling them what to do, which is actually like one of the best skills for a manager is you're not telling anybody what to do. You're giving them information so that they make good choices. So that is my 20-minute spiel about games, working in games, being a DM, and why those two are related. I'm going to end with a bunch of Q&A if people have questions. So give me just a moment here. I'm going to hop back over to the comments and see if there's anything anybody wants to ask. Yeah, thanks. Oh, okay, I'm like checking back in. I was like, thank you, everybody. I will give Boo Boo a good noogie as a benefit. And yes, there's very much managing expectations. Oh, by the way, slight little pitch here. If folks want to support Lambert House, we have these awesome D&D T-shirts that are available that we just rebooted. So if you want to go and support them, they are one of the most awesome nonprofits I've personally ever worked with. The people there are super awesome. Yeah, and there's also like a White Dragon one as well. Fun fact, I got to work on that. Like that was a side project some of us in the group did. So if folks, good strategies for when a coworker player goes against the grain with all the other players. See, that's what goes into the pre-prep session where I think a lot of times I do often deal with coworkers who are angry in a meeting because they wanted to get something done and we didn't get to do it, or they were fighting really hard for a feature in a game and doesn't make it in. A lot of times, same with players, is You don't necessarily address it in the moment because that gets to be very confrontational, but you go circle back afterwards with them and you say, what happened? Are you doing okay? Is there something going on? I find a lot of times it helps to have people talk through it. You may not be able to resolve the issue for them, but just being able to listen and hearing what they have to say and valuing it, I think goes a long way to helping to solve the problem. Even better yet is when you can solve the problem. I had a player, this is a player example, who didn't want to do certain things with their character, was afraid of speaking up as a person. And what I worked with her on was to talk through, well, if you want to have certain moments for your character, why don't you and I work on them in advance for the next session, and I will set up for it. So like you get that kind of reassurance that the DM has set up this thing that is for you. And so it's okay for you to then, kind of perform a certain way. And that was really fun because it allowed them to develop their character, allowed them to use their voice in a way that they wouldn't have. And all the other players were surprised because it was something we had planned in secret. And so they kind of got to have that big moment for the other players. Similarly, sometimes when you can solve the problem for a coworker, maybe it's just something they wanted to talk about with the group. In my case, a lot of times it's like, there's some risk that they're concerned about and that they feel it's not being addressed. Sometimes we can bring it up as an agenda item in the next meeting and say, hey, let's talk about this and get everybody's feedback. And maybe that acknowledgement was what they wanted. Or maybe sometimes there's actually something you can do about it. But I do find that I do pay a lot more attention when I am the one running the meeting or when I'm the DM, trying to make sure that people are heard and that their concerns are accounted for. What are my 6-level goals? I'm not sure what my 6-level goals are. Like, is that actually a thing? Yep, I agree. Okay. Dealt with a corporate TPK. I don't think I have. Like, I mean, in the sense that, yes, sometimes some meetings you could qualify as a TPK. I don't think I've actually been in those meetings. Those are often high-level encounters that our executive producers go into, and sometimes that does result in a TPK, usually because the big boss, literally the president of the company, has shown up and has opinions. Very much, yeah. And I have to say, though, I think one of the things I also learned from games, just because you had a TPK doesn't mean that's the end of the game. Like, you go back, you level up, you go better, and you go back in and you do it again. Yep. So thank you, everybody, for joining this chat. I hope you got something useful out of it. It's something that I've been thinking about for a very long time, and I'm so glad I got the opportunity to share with you. Thanks, everyone. All right. That went faster than I thought. I, for some reason, can't hear you, Josh. Thanks so
it's
much,
because
Doug.
I put myself on mute. That's why.
Oh, that happens. That's the thing that happens.
I was just saying thank you so much for talking with us. It was a great session, and that's going to be on YouTube for rebroadcast if people want to view that later.
Great. So I'm going to get going because I actually have to go run a game at 2.
Awesome. See you later. Thanks so much.
Bye. Thanks for having me.